All right, so welcome Jasmonae, Dr. Jasmonae Joyriel. Her practice is called Ignite Anew and focuses on trauma as well as relationships. uh, Excuse me, let's do that again. So, big welcome to Dr. Jasmonae Joyriel. Her practice is called Ignite Anew, and she's practicing in 38 states. She's going to be sharing today about how she works with couples and individuals on sexual health, intimacy, eroticism, and the concomitant trauma, which typically and almost always informs our relationships with others. And her background, I'll let her speak for herself, but it's quite interesting from doing hair when she was 20 years old, from deciding to go to a master's program while dealing with an abusive relationship, then doubling down on that, going into her doctoral psychology program, doing yoga teacher training at the same time, which actually helped her excise a lot of her trauma, and moving from this initial goal of working with veterans, especially those who had seen combat, all the way to working with couples on their eroticism and sexual health. And so she'll touch on all those topics from a clinical and from an academic landscape, and how what the research shows today as well as what her practice shows today, but also we'll touch a lot on the practical tips about talking health with your partner, talking health with your parents, your family, and she'll share some personal narratives as well. And we'll finish today with her top three recommendations around green pilling those close to you, whether it be around sexual health, family health, chronic illness, etc. So with that, Jasmine, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining.
No, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And would you mind just kind of filling in some gaps of what I just shared? You know, what your practice is today, who do you work with, what gets you excited to get out of the bed in the morning? You know, what makes you do this?
Yeah, so you mentioned, I have a private practice here in Austin called Ignite Anew, and I practice both locally and through telehealth in about 38 states. And what I focus on, or what I love to focus on, is really working on relationships. I work a lot with couples around sex, eroticism, and intimacy, both how to experience pleasure individually and as a pair or more. And the way I sort of branch into that is that I was working specifically with complex trauma. That's initially where I started in grad school. And, I've always loved working, like understanding how something works, how you put it together. Everything we do in life is based off of a system. And so I just kind of slowly got pushed towards going towards couples. And from there, I think there was something that was always missing when I was doing couples work, where we would be looking at conflict and communication and how to build connection. But to
Hmm.
me, there was a big piece of the system that was missing. And as I started kind of working through some of my own stuff, I kept on coming back to like sex and that so much of what isn't covered, even in grad school, was
Hmm.
how you connect with your partner erotically and how you connect with yourself erotically. And that just ties into so many other things, so many other traumas that people I've worked with have experienced, so many other ways that people have felt disempowered or silenced. And that just kind of got me going down this road. And once I started, I couldn't stop. And so that is primarily what I do, but I still work with some individuals with trauma. And as far as well, I guess I told you what got me into this. So, but I would say the bigger thing of psychology is that I really wanted to, one, figure out, like, was all the pain, all the experiences that we were going through actually necessary? And the other one was
Mm.
to make space. That I had grown up in a military family and moved around a lot. And so when you do that, you start to see that people are all the same but different. And if you take a
Mm.
moment to stop, pause, listen, you can see a lot more of the things we have in common and see a lot of the ways that we actually intersect more than that we diverge. And so that's what got me started in this.
Yeah, it sounds iterative. as a journey. Kind of, you start out one way and you found something interesting, followed, then you found that that's even more interesting than you thought. And and so when you were coming into your master's program, was working on relationships was working on relationships and part of the focus, but then it wasn't necessarily sex. So when did sex come up again for you, if you don't mind just doubling down? Because I think people would be interested. You hear about therapy and you say, okay, yeah, she's a therapist. She works on depression, anxiety, maybe even trauma is now becoming more popular. And you orient towards couples and eroticism, but you also bring the trauma lens.
Yeah, so I think when I first went in, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I've always been a person who's more of an inductive adventure versus a deductive. Is I kind of let the path unfold for me, which has given me a lot of freedom and flexibility and creativity to like do what actually fits, which has always been sort of intuitively in my nature. So when I
Hmm.
went, it kind of was like I knew I wanted to do this, and the first thing was like I want to work with adults. That kids weren't really the right fit for me. I didn't have
Hmm.
the bandwidth for it, and
Hmm.
once I got there, I really resonated with trauma in the way that I think the way I learned about trauma oftentimes is that it's like this bruise, and if you just deal with it and you work on it, it'll be gone. And because I
Mm.
come with a history of trauma, you know, I knew that that did not feel honest or right. That to me, like trauma is a scar. And I don't,
Scar.
it's not a problem for it to be a scar. Yes, of course, a scar. And
Hmm.
with it
Hmm.
being a scar, I think the biggest thing is learning how to accept and embrace the scar
Mm.
and to let it have time to heal and realizing that, scars aren't always pretty, but like they don't have to limit you in what you do. You don't have to tell everybody the story of every scar you have. You really get to pick and choose. There are some days when you may want to cover it up. There are some days when you may feel really, really beautiful and empowered and don't mind showing it off. But it's a very personal experience and process. And for me, like I wanted to connect more of that with a lot of people who didn't seem to be finding the answer and were
Mm.
getting really really. I think there was a feeling of helplessness that I think I was often hearing of, why can't I get this right? Why can't I fix this? Why can't I
Mm.
just feel better? And
Mm.
that is like that's gut wrenching to hear, right? So, as I was doing that, as you mentioned, I found myself, unfortunately, in a not so great marriage that had turned abusive for a lot of different reasons. And, you know, at some point, you also know that like you have to do your own work. I think that's one of the biggest things is when you hold a responsibility like mine, is you
Mhm.
cannot bring your stuff into the room. And so I think there's a part of me that knew there needs to be some separation and you need some stuff to do for yourself and you need some healing for yourself. And so as I was like kind of going through this and going through my own process, the other thing, like I said, is that I really loved working with systems and trying to figure out how do you put these things together, and
Mhm.
enjoyed working with couples, but felt like there was something missing, even with individuals. A lot of the individuals I would talk to, weren't connected with their erotic identity. We could talk about finances, we could talk about religion,
Mhm.
spirituality, we could talk about education, we could talk about culture, identity. And here's this one big piece that was completely disconnected and compartmentalized. And to me, it it really hit, I think, in conjunction with the Me Too movement, and we were talking about like how we needed to shift and what we've been socialized to believe, and the who takes accountability, who has responsibility. And to me it's like, but we can't talk about sex. So
Mm.
how do we get into any of these deeper level conversations? How do we talk about boundaries? How do we talk about what our wants and our needs are? How do we ask for consent? How do we give consent if we can't talk about sex? I can't
Mm.
say, yes, I want to have sex if I'm not supposed to talk about sex at all. I also can't say no. And so there was this huge place, or what I call these experiences where people were being violated, right? That there's assault and there's also consent, but there's this huge gray area where it's, I didn't want to, but I didn't feel like I could speak, or I wanted to, but good girls, good boys don't do this, and all of these places where it's like, because we're not integrated in our sexuality, we can't be empowered in the decisions we're making sexually. We can't be empowered in our boundaries. We can't be empowered in our pleasure. We can't be empowered in our relationships or ourselves. And to me, like that, like just one connected very nicely, and very like to me seamlessly with trauma, but also is this place of like, you know, what if we reimagine that sex wasn't this, salacious and sinful thing, but this experience that most humans have, and what if humans were equipped to be able to say, you know what, I enthusiastically want to do this, or I enthusiastically do not want to do this, and because I feel completely comfortable in my wants and needs, and in understanding this part of my identity, which is a very natural part of my identity, that then I can have these conversations with friends, with family, with lovers, with my partner, and how that could change how we connect, how we respect each other, how we take up space, how we feel in our own bodies. And to me it's like, well, sex just seemed to be the big aha for all of it.
Wow. I mean, I think you've kind of found the missing link because I think every listener would agree that sex is almost still taboo in our society to talk about, although you see it on the airwaves quite a bit, from the radio to TV to billboards. But having an actual discussion about it always seems taboo and you need to whisper. Do you mind sharing your view on what, it's 2023 as we record this, what has happened historically in this country and maybe in the United States, maybe even, yeah, I guess I would just say in the popular culture more broadly, that has led us to this point where eroticism and sex is still something we can't say yes to, we can't talk about, and it is viewed as salacious. I mean, what's the historical context there from your view?
So, one, I think that's a really big question, and I will not pretend to be
Hmm.
a historian. What I
Hmm.
would say, what I think I have from research I've studied, and from what I've witnessed, is that it is also tied into, there's a lot around power, right? Who
Hmm.
owns what, to include bodies. It has to
Hmm.
do with desire, right? What happens when, I'm a Black woman? What happens when someone who is not a Black person likes a Black person, especially during the time of slavery?
Hmm.
It has to do with, what sells, right? What hits these pieces, these parts of us that are very primal, and very very raw, and are we allowed to one, own that and use that, but also we want to own and use that because guess what, that gets us to something else we may want. um of course religion is a big piece that comes into it, and it's really funny because if anybody's actually gone through religious sex is all in there. It's in there in a bunch of different ways. um but we oftentimes go to like one or two verses that feel more palatable, right? Or get the
Hmm.
message that we want across. But I think it really takes like looking at how complex sex is, and realizing it comes from a lot of different sources for a lot of different reasons. But if I had to put it down to a couple
Hmm.
words, it would be power and pleasure.
Hmm. Power and pleasure, and who can have it, and who can, and who can ask for it, and who kind of needs to be the receiver. You have this kind of
Absolutely.
you have what was and what still is patriarchal society, and you talk about Me Too, and I'm frankly just my own interest. I think with Me Too coming along, you found a lot of text messages dug up. You found a lot of screenshots. You found a lot of videos. You think about Louis C.K. or folks like that, or Matt Lauer, or different people who Weinstein, and I'm sure there's tons of others. How does privacy come into play, both in your practice and when you think about Me Too in the digital age? Because something changed for Me Too to happen, and personally, one of my hypotheses is that things were able to be recorded and have records. It wouldn't just be he said, she said, he said, or vice versa. So how does privacy play into Me Too in your practice, and how do you think about it?
Ooh, that's a good one. I don't think I've ever been asked that question.
I didn't think I would go there either, but I'm so curious about it.
No, I love it. I
Feel
love
free to
it.
take a minute.
So, I see the problem with privacy, right? Is what is private and for what reason is it private?
Hmm. Yeah, we
That's
got to
kind of
define
where
our
my head
terms.
is
Yeah,
going
we
with
got to
that,
define our terms.
right?
Yeah.
Because even the idea of privacy, is it privacy because this is something that I hold sacred and it's just for me, or is
Hmm.
it privacy because there's shame and I can't, this is not okay, this is not allowed. And to me, it's like things that are in dark curdle and mold and
Hmm.
mildew
Hmm.
and corrupt, where things that are in light flourish and blossom and evolve and thrive. And so to me,
I
even
guess,
the
yeah.
fact
Yeah.
of sexuality having to be put in this place of privacy, there aren't checks and balances, right? Like, and I think that's where you're getting, is like, now that things are recorded, that now people can be exposed. But it goes back to that bringing things to light versus, like, if
Hmm.
I could own this and it never was in the dark to begin with, we wouldn't be having that issue, right? If I felt empowered to have a sense
Hmm.
of eroticism or sexual identity, um, I wouldn't need to feel like, oh, I wasn't really comfortable with that what they said to me, but I don't know if I should have to deal with it, or could I say something, or what will people think, or what will happen to me. And so I think that, to me, the fundamental part of that is that we can't talk about it to begin with. And so if you're not allowed to, then when it shows up, then now I'm dealing with every experience of how to hold that. And for those who want to manipulate and exploit that, then they use that to
Hmm.
target others. But if
Hmm.
this was not
Hmm.
something that we were afraid to talk about, right? Like, we're not afraid to talk about finances. So if somebody came in and hacked into my account and stole some money, I'd be like, hey, somebody hacked into my account and stole my money. This is outrageous. And we have all these other systems in place to be like, oh, somebody tried to exploit you, somebody tried to take advantage of you. Here are the steps. This is what you do. But we don't
Hmm.
do that
Hmm.
because we aren't supposed to be connected to those type of topics and that experience within ourselves. And so I it's hard for me to disentangle that word privacy with the bigger piece of, like, secrecy and shame and hiding this piece that should be just an everyday topic.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Well, it does, and I think first defining our terms around privacy, as you mentioned, it's the right to do something in secret without others knowing. And I think what you're sharing is that you'd rather live in a reality, and you're working to create a reality where people don't feel ashamed of sharing about the threesome, or being non-monogamous, or having multiple partners, or having an open relationship. And so if society were, I mean, society, let's say, let's be specific, if a corporate executive could come to their office and say, yeah, I'm in a non-monogamous relationship, and not blink an eye and not have shame or secrecy around it, then he or she wouldn't need they wouldn't need to have privacy around their interactions with their non-monogamous partners. And so I think you're advocating for, at a in the early stages of education, and when you're teaching kids about sex, teaching perhaps, hey, there's monogamous relationships, there's homosexual relationships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm just thinking, I think what you're talking about is that everything in the dark gets worse. And when you have things that you're hiding and you're ashamed of, they typically express themselves in other ways, whether it be through the body, in your relationships, how you self-reject or self-sabotage. And so if I'm hearing you right, if we were more public and more open about where we are at sexually, then there'd be less need for shame and hiding. Is that a fair summary?
I think yes, but the other part is ethics, right? Like if I don't have shame around the type of relationship I want to have, then we can get into how to have that relationship ethically, right? So
Mm.
where you're talking
Mhm.
about non-monogamy, there's a difference between non-monogamy and infidelity. Now, I may
Mhm.
be
Mhm.
non-monogamous, but if there's a lot of shame about being non-monogamous, then I might pretend to be monogamous and then I hurt somebody in the process because of my own shame, right? Because rather than telling a
Mhm.
partner, hey, I'm not a monogamous person, I pretend to be monogamous, and then I go and cheat and I lie and I hide things and I'm doing all of these things because it's too scary to just say, hey, this isn't the right type of relationship structure for me, or vice
Mhm.
versa, right? Like, I think there's a part of bringing things into light, but the other part is then we get into how do we do things with care and accountability and compassion for the people we share this world, this life, this experience with. Like, if
Mhm.
I can talk about those things, then we get to actually have the conversations that really matter.
And on that point, I think it's a great jumping off point when you work with your clients, and you give them advice on whether it's disclosing to their current partner or approaching a new partner, with with authenticity. How do you structure those conversations? The reason I ask, because even if it wasn't a conversation about sexuality or eroticism, it could be a conversation about something else, but there's still the right way, or there's still probably some recommended ways to talk about serious subjects. And so what kind of general guidance system do you give people? And then maybe you can get into some specific, anonymized narratives, because you did touch on systems as well.
Yeah. So I want to because I do realize that we are talking about health, and this actually just came up recently,
Mhm.
where I was working with a client where there's this conversation about health and fitness, and to me, like there's conflict, but the conflict was coming from a lack of clarity, right? And so I always start with whenever you're having important conversations is really seeking to learn. So being very curious, like, what are you really trying to tell me? Like, what meaning does this hold for you? Why is this important? So, if we're talking about, something sexually, it's not just simply like an act, but it may be about the experience of this is the way that I feel free, or this is the way that, I get to explore, or this is the way that I feel safe. And so under first starting with clarity, or not clarity, sorry, excuse me, let's start that over again. First starting with curiosity.
Mhm.
Yeah,
No,
it
go ahead. Yeah,
happens.
we can. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Mhm. Starting with curiosity. Yeah, because you're
yeah, so
seeking to learn,
starting
right?
yeah, you're seeking to learn, and then after that is getting clarity. So where we were
Okay.
talking about privacy, I think, I connected privacy to secrecy, and I'm not sure that that's exactly the question you were asking me, but I kind of went on a roll with it. But if we'd gotten clarity, then, it would have been like, no, I don't really I'm not thinking of privacy from a secrecy, but maybe of this is just something I don't think I need to share with the world, right? Which is a
Mm.
different
Mhm.
way of interpreting privacy. But a lot of times, what happens is sort of what we did in here, which is I just took my meaning for it, how I was interpreting and experiencing it, and went on with that. And
Mhm.
when you go, you can end up being in two very different places
Mhm.
where when we slow down and like, is this what we're actually talking about? Is this what you're really trying to tell me? And we see clarity, then we get closer to being back on that same page. Right. And then after we get back on that same page or close to that same page, is what do we want to do about it? What's the approach? And it being totally okay for us to have different resolutions. Like I think there's this big place where it's like everybody needs to come to the exact same resolution, and like you don't.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know, it doesn't make anybody bad. What it does talk about is like what what am I willing to concede? What do I need to collaborate? And what are the things that like are absolutely the most valuable to me? And those are the things that determine, do we align? Do we fit? Do we work? And if we don't, what if there was compassion and saying, you know what? We are different. This is that thing where it is a value of mine that I cannot let go, but it's okay that
Hmm.
it's not your value. And I respect that.
And by the way, I appreciate you bringing up sort of the meta narrative in our own conversation about privacy versus secrecy versus I don't know the right word, but keeping things, having the right to keep things to yourself, which you touched on with scarring,
Mhm.
um, and going back to your system, which you recommend to clients, because just really giving some actionable takeaways for those listening. When you go into a conversation, look, first there's a conflict. Inevitably, read Plato. Uh, there's conflict in human relations, and then there's resolution, then there's the end of the story. And I think we often think in stories, so like everything's going well. Oh shoot, there's this conflict. One person you, maybe isn't holding up their end of the bargain, or some expectations aren't met, or maybe there is infidelity, or maybe there's just a desire for it. So one person, let's just say there's two in the relationship, says, hey, I really have this internal desire to let's say to see another person, and then we're in a monogamous relationship. And the other person says, okay, let me first get curious about that, then let's get clarity on what you mean by that, and when, and how often, and who. And then once we've understood each other, and making sure we don't talk past each other, and making sure you continue these gut checks, like, is that what you meant, or is that what you meant? Then it's leading with compassion as well as boundary, and saying, okay, um, think I understand what you're saying. It sounds like this. Either this may fit into my value system. Here's where I can compromise. This will not fit into my value system, and we can part amicably. Or yes, we agree on this piece. I mean, is that a fair summary? So it's curiosity,
Yeah, I
clarity,
think that's
and some
beautiful.
resolution. Yeah. Thank
No,
you.
I think
Thank
that
you.
you yeah, that was a perfect synthesis of my wonderful, like, flowery
No, no, no.
explanation.
I'm a health coach. I'm a trainer. So I'm always trying to make things super simple for people. And there's roles for both, right?
Yeah, no, I love it.
If I was a psychotherapist, people would spend 5 minutes with me, be like, okay, I'm going home. I'm having the conversation, and probably the hit rate on those conversations wouldn't be very good. But they'd probably go exercise.
Yeah, no,
So
I love it.
yeah,
I was like, "That's great. I need that tool," right?
I maybe build an AI Alex. I don't know. But I think I'm so psyched to have this conversation with you, because I think people need to hear also the ebbs and flows, and there's gonna be it's not gonna those conversations aren't easy. I mean, I have them with my
They aren't,
partner.
they aren't.
Growing up, my mom, just to give a few personal narratives, my mom was schizophrenic when I was, my whole life really. And she was also really big on surfacing the stuff inside. So she had a lot of wisdom around, like, don't keep things bottled up, they'll curdle, to use your words. And so she would have us write iMessages, which is actually a thing we did in elementary school. I don't know any other 90s kids or late 80s kids out there, but say, I feel this way because, and it'd be like, I feel anxious because I want to just relax at home and play video games, but you want to go on a date. I mean, even that could be a tough conversation, you know?
Yeah,
So I'm just thinking, like, maybe you've got a few cool narratives, not to put you on the spot, on, when your system has worked really well, and maybe sometimes where it hasn't, and what you recommend after the fact. What do you think?
yeah. So I guess because I don't look at it more as a system, right? I think that's one thing that I wanna differentiate,
Yeah, please clarify.
uh,
Yeah.
that that a lot of this stuff is a way to orient yourself in the world. That what I often tell the clients that I'm working with is like, this is a process of how you want to show up, how you want to experience living. So in the way that it's an experience, that I already said it, that nothing's ever going to work specifically well because there are a million and one, different pieces of our environment that we cannot calculate for, and so I think having that flexibility initially is key, is realizing, like, I think when I think about system, a computer system, right? If a computer
Hmm.
system's going well, it functions perfectly and it can reach
Hmm.
that level of perfection.
Hmm.
But humaning is not that. Humaning is its own thing entirely. And so I always say it needs to stay in humaning, right? Humaning needs to stay in the
Hmm.
humaning department.
Hmm.
Once we get from that point, then the next part is where things can and will go off. That's not something we're going to ever control. I think what we can do is really try to stay connected to ourselves in those moments, right? So if I am trying to have this discussion, right, and let's say I'm talking to my partner, and in this discussion, something from my past, my trauma, like one of those landmines gets hit, I am no longer like present. I go all the way back
Hmm.
to those years where I'm scared, I'm terrified, I'm trapped, and everything gets filtered through that lens at that point. It doesn't matter what they say, it doesn't matter what they do. Everything at that moment has now become, you know, what is that? What's that app that people use? Snapchat, where it's like all those
Hmm.
different filters. It is now going through one of those filters, and it is a, terrifying, horrific filter, right?
What
Like,
color is
I,
it?
I don't know, putrid green, maybe.
Wow,
That's
I was
okay to
thinking
buy.
red. That's even worse. That's better. Yeah. Uh-huh. So that filter
And
turns on,
so,
right? Yeah.
right? And so I think, and this, and obviously I've been doing this for a long time,
Hmm.
but like initially it's just like noticing that happens, right? That
Hmm.
like, oh, putrid green, and then that's maybe the best you got. It's like, oh, we went somewhere else, and
Hmm.
then, maybe from, it going to like noticing that that filter came on, or that filter was activated, is like, then understanding what that filter does, right? And maybe I don't know very much about the filter. I just start noticing that there is a filter. And then I
Hmm.
go from noticing that there is a filter to be like, okay, is this like a happy filter? Is this a scary filter? Is this a sad filter? Like, like, what does the
Hmm.
filter do to me? Right? And
Hmm.
then the next thing is like, okay, what's the thing that like activated the filter, right? Like, what button got pressed? And these are moments that you're slowly building towards, and it takes like a lot of, a lot of practice, meditation, really learning how to sit in your body, how to be more integrated in your body. So I do understand that I'm all of these are pieces that you have to build. They don't just come, just
Hmm.
like good sex, you have to learn it. um,
Hmm.
just
Yeah,
to
let's
give
get
that
there
plug
too. I
real
want to hear about that.
quick.
Hmm.
But so as I one, notice that there is a filter, then notice what the filter does, then notice what activated the filter, right? The next part is like, if I can, is can I shorten that, right? Can I do something, and can I communicate that, hey,
Hmm.
when this thing happens, it typically activates this filter of mine, right?
Hmm.
So it could be that, like, for me, part of, I think we were talking earlier about me loving like a clean living room. And part of it
Hmm.
is because when I walk into my house and the living room is in disarray, it activates like that chaotic feeling I had when I was living in terror, right? That
Hmm.
everything just felt like chaos in my home. And
Hmm.
so coming home now to a very nice living room, it's like, oh, it's peaceful, it's safe, it's calm, I'm okay. And
Mm-hmm.
communicating that to my partner, like, hey, this is really important for me, but it
Mm-hmm.
took me a while to figure it out. Like, I didn't know that at first. It'd just be like, why is the living room in chaos? And I had to first, like, okay, filter. Okay. What's happening with this filter? What type of filter is this? Okay, what activated the filter? Okay, it's the living room. Okay, what can I do and what can I communicate?
And if we can take that living room example and the activation of the filter, whether it be sensory stimuli or, well, probably sensory in this case with the living room, which brings you back to some kind of either this, it activates a scar. It's like somebody touching a painful scar on your body. Or
Hmm.
in contrast, if the living room is really clean, it doesn't activate that filter. Maybe it activates the subsequent part of your life where everything was kind of in order, clean, you got out of a tough situation, and
Hmm.
then you had more control. So both of those environmental stimuli actually activate different filters, and you could say emotions translating to some interpretation in the brain, creating a narrative, which is everything's okay in the case of clean, and oh, everything's in disarray, it's a mess in the case of dirty or messy. And I think it's just so important for folks to be aware of which of those systems they want to activate. And you can be pretty intentional. I mean, if it takes one good conversation with your partner and explaining to them, hey, when it's messy, this is what happens in my brain, um, man, that is worth it. And I mean, just taking it back
Yeah.
very briefly to exercise or to health, I mean, if you were made fun of for being tubby in gym class, and every time you go to the gym, that's the filter that comes on, well, you better download the Alex Loves Health app and do it at home because, or you need to kind of psych yourself in instead of psyching yourself out when you go to that
Right.
gym. And and
Well,
so
and
on the
here's the
topic
cool
of
thing, right?
filters, which I love, yeah, go ahead.
Can I throw something in real quick? Is Here's the
Yeah,
cool thing,
please.
right? So in that example of, like, if you go to the gym and this comes back up, or in home and, like, communicating with my partner, is this is where there's the opportunity for a corrective experience. We love using this in therapy as the corrective experience. Is I go to the gym and someone's like, hey, I don't have a spot. Would you help? Like, would you team up with me?
Hmm.
Like, is
Hmm.
being able, because the cool thing about understanding your filter and knowing that that filter is there is you're no longer imprisoned by it, right? So
Mm,
what I now do, now that I'm not in prison because I understand that this filter is here, is now that when this person comes up to me in the gym is like, "Hey, can I get a spot?" I'm like, "Oh, wait, they're not bullying me. Oh,
mm,
this is a good
mhm,
experience with the gym." And I create a new filter, right? I start to build that in with this experience, because I understand, rather than me being imprisoned by my filter because it's just overwhelming and, oh my god, it's too much, is, oh, I know where this is coming from. I know what this is doing. I know what I'm up against. I know that the monster I'm battling, right?
mhm.
Now that I see that, I have some space to maybe see what else is there, to see what else is
And
going on.
so, I mean, I could jump so many places with it. When it comes to the gym, if you see a patient who comes in and says, "Hey, I don't feel sexy in my body. I know I need to lose weight. I know I need to get back on my routines, my hygiene, my sleep hygiene, food." And so they say, "Hey, I don't feel sexy, and therefore I don't want to be intimate with my partner because I don't feel hot. I don't want to take my clothes off." Just crafting a narrative here. And then you
Yeah.
ask them, perhaps, or the therapist asks them, "Hey, like, well, what makes you hesitate to work out? What makes you hesitate to eat well?" And then they say, "Well, the last time I was on my workout thing, um, my trainer actually like totally ditched me and like made fun of me, or I got made fun of at school, or my old partner was really sloppy and then kind of abusive when it came to food and would criticize me when I tried to lose weight." So then that's pretty obvious to the person, like, hey, I have these old filters that are still applying when it comes to instantiating a health behavior. And then you might say as a therapist, or a therapist might say, okay, well, well, what do we do from here? Because you know about your filters. So then it's reprogramming or how creating a corrective experience. And so, maybe it's hiring a coach, hiring a trainer, but if the person can't, let's just say they can't hire somebody, and maybe on my food kitchen example, how do you help them reprogram when let's say they've got their 200, $300 a week to see you, but they don't have enough budget to go hire Tom Brady's
Yeah.
private chef and trainer? How do you do that when it comes to health?
So it's so funny. I was just listening to this health book. It's called Healthy as Fuck. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Oh,
It's
really? No, I
hilarious.
haven't. Uh-uh.
Yeah, it's
What's it
really
about?
fun.
Uh-huh.
It's a really, I think, em- a powerful way to approach, and that it's twofold. And I love that the way you had brought up two filters about the clean house versus the chaotic house, because I would say
Mhm.
that's the part that's missing out of this conversation, right? Before we even get to like, okay, you know your filters, and why isn't it not working, but it's like the other part, right? Which is what does this body do for you, right? Like what
Mm.
does what like and I would argue that if getting back in shape is just about having sex, is
Mhm.
that really what it is? You know, or is there something else going on there, right? Like what is it really tied to? Like when what the things that we want, like are we really getting to like what they do for us? Um because I think if when we really do have that why, that is where the motivation comes in. That is where we can start being creative and flexible and being like, okay, maybe I can't do all of this, but I could do this. And maybe I can't, maybe this doesn't fit my schedule, but this could fit my schedule. That we like again, we start to give ourselves a lot more room to, I think, play, right? Than if we're just stuck in the place of like, well, I just know this one part of the filters, but like to really understand the other filters, right? I can articulate exactly what it is that I'm experiencing when the house comes in, and then you even added on some, right? Like it gives you a sense of control, and I think that would be the part with getting back in shape is like, what is it that you're really looking for? Is it is
And
it
so
is
you
it really
challenge the
about
person,
you
like,
feeling good to yourself? Go ahead.
and sorry to interrupt you, like, if because I deal with clients all the time and who are, out of shape and overweight and probably don't feel that sexy. Do we get there? Sometimes, if they can get vulnerable with me. So if they say to me, hey, well, I want to actually be intimate with my partner, I don't feel confident. You might say, well, what happens? And I would probably say this: what happens when you feel confident? Then, and you have amazing sex. What's the downstream outcome of that? Because I think like people are always like, well, I want to lose 10 pounds. I'm like, okay, well, what makes you want to lose 10 pounds? Well, I want to look better in a bathing suit. Okay, well, what? And you go, keep going, keep going, keep going. And I try to get to people's whys, which is a big motivational tactic when you're, especially in the days where you don't want to do something. You look at the post it in the mirror. I think David Goggins, the ultra runner, military guy, is big on the post its in the mirror. So I guess for you in this scenario, you might ask them, well, what would happen if you have good sex? And what else would you ask them, um, to
Yeah,
dive
like
deeper?
what,
Yeah.
right? Like what is special about the good sex? How do you
Mhm.
define good sex, right?
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
especially in the like when we're talking about something like health, right? Like that those are real things that can come up, right? Like as your body changes as you age.
Mhm.
Well, if I'm trying to have the sex of a 20-year-old, it doesn't matter if I lose weight. I'm still not going to maybe have the sex of a 20-year-old, right? Like
Mm.
that there might be like things that like my body isn't doing anymore.
Mhm.
Rather than like, okay, I want to have sex for me to enjoy this, right? Or I think this is what my partner will enjoy. Like
Mhm.
anything that is external, it's not going to hold weight anyway. If it's like, hey, like I want to lose weight because like my stomach is like, my is hitting each other and it doesn't feel good, and this is why, right? It doesn't feel good to me, right? and
Mhm.
and I don't like that feeling. Then that's something we can like work with, right? But if it's like, well, this is what I think my partner wants,
Mm.
like one, I like I if that is the only thing that holds me to that thing, that is not going to be sustainable, right? That to me is like, that's not going to be something that I can move towards, because that can always be fleeting and changing, and me focused on everyone else, but not about how I feel. And if it's
And
about how somebody else is seeing me, then how do I fall in love with that?
and with that orienting towards you, which I think makes a lot of sense, just from a I don't know, it just jives with my philosophy. When you talk about sex with folks and you talk about trauma and maybe even like the symptom of people pleasing, because I think what I hear when a scary situation comes up, there might be fight or flight, which people are familiar with, but then there's fawn, which is kind of what a deer does, and it kind of just sits there. And then there's a freeze
Mhm. I
response.
did.
And I guess I'm jumping a little bit all over the place, so feel free to like bring me back to the narrative. I guess when it comes to people being not feeling okay and wanting to feel okay, so whether that's getting their sleep right, their food right, getting their sex life right, getting their job right, you can motivate them with a future vision, back it out into what we need to do today and find the motivation, make sure it relates to them. Um, but what if they get, yeah, like how do you get into the deeper stuff that you touched on at the top of the podcast, which is, hey, a lot of this stuff just makes them feel helpless. Like people just feel they can't get through it. And then you kind of know it's probably a signal, say, okay, well, there's something else here. It's not just like a behavioral habit that they picked up, but they feel so
Yeah.
helpless to take care of themselves. I guess I don't know exactly what I'm asking, but I want to get a little bit to the more serious stuff, and I know you do that in your practice, so I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, I think one is that we live in a society that is very solution focused and rush, 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 rush.
Yes.
Let's pop it in the microwave. 30 seconds later, it comes up, and that is just, again, like, humaning needs to stay in the humaning department. And I think when we slow down, one is like to actually be very curious. I will go back to curiosity too, because
Hmm.
I think so often is we haven't found that thing that fits yet, but it's close enough, right? It'll do the trick, right? We can use that one. Versus, like, does that actually fit? Like, the one of the things I always am telling clients is, correct me, fix this so it fits. If I don't want you to just say yes or it's close enough, if it does not fit, we haven't found it yet.
Sorry, what do you mean exactly
And,
to cut you off?
like,
Do you,
if
like,
I'm like, so this is what I think is going on, or this, so
okay,
tell me if this is right.
uh-huh,
I'm always coming back to, like, because the moment you hit that thing, right? So we're talking in the world of health, and
mm-hmm,
it's like, I want to just lose, this, and it's like, and you're asking the whys. When you do
mm-hmm,
that, like, hey, here, let me give you back your narrative.
mm-hmm,
I think the part that, like, maybe sometimes, like, that gets left off is, does that fit? Because when you hear it back,
mm-hmm.
you'd be like, oh, no, that's not exactly what it is. Or yes, bingo. Yep, you
So
hit it. You hit the nail on the head.
that's
And that is
mirroring
the
in a way.
buy. It's beyond mirroring, right? It's more so reflecting, but then for accuracy. Have
And
you ever
confirming.
seen when you,
Yeah.
so you know the camera, right? The phone camera. You know how you can take the panorama,
Mm-hmm,
and you have to, like, try to keep that line
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
straight.
mm-hmm,
That is the thing that, like, a lot of times we are off that line by just a little bit, right?
mm-hmm.
But instead of, like, saying, "Ooh, I need to line it up and get that line straight," it's like, "It'll be fine. This will be okay." Right?
And
And then
and you
we just
attribute
keep on
that to the
going.
quick fix nature of like Americans generally and kind of the desire to just find a solution and run with it instead of getting it right? Or do you tie those two together? I can kind of see
I
somewhat.
I think it's
Yeah.
quick fix, right? See, here, I'm doing it right now. See, you just asked, is it, are you tying to a quick fix? I'm like, it's sort of the quick fix, but
Hmm.
also that it's close enough. and that most of us experience that in our relationships, in our careers, in our values, right? It's close enough. And
Is close enough going to make you happy, or is it going to make you peaceful? Probably not, I guess. That's what you might be saying.
correct. Especially
I
if
think
I'm
that's
coming in
huge.
saying that
Yeah.
there's something I want to change, right? If we're going to really do change,
Hmm.
then we really do need to figure out the change that you're looking for,
Mm,
because that is how it's going to be successful and impactful. But if you're saying I want to change, but like I'm off, I'm not
hmm.
on target, yeah, it may hold for a little bit,
Hmm.
but it doesn't end up being sustainable because it's not the change that I'm actually looking for.
And what do you do both as a practitioner and well, just in your sessions when somebody comes to you, you restate back, you mirror and you restate back. They say, well, it's not exactly that. You keep digging, and then I guess you probably usually get there, right? I could see you kind of getting there. I could see you being like, nope, we're going to sit here and talk about this and set your goal until we set the goal. We're going to try to figure out what feels good for you, or I have to at least understand you first. So you must spend a lot of time getting it right.
Actually, I spend most of the time getting it wrong, I think.
Really?
But I think
Yeah.
that's it, is because I keep on going back, right?
Mhm.
And so when I'm saying I'm spending most of the time getting wrong is that I do it, and rather than just being like it's close enough, is it's the feedback. Hey, how did
Mhm.
this feel?
Mhm.
How did this work? What didn't click? What did click? Right? So if I'm doing it from an inductive stance, I'm not saying like this is going to be the solution, this is what's going to work, and then you're the deviator. As I'm going to say, okay, I'm following you, and as things are working, I'm going to let these other pieces go off. And I'm going to start customizing and tailoring as I'm understanding and learning you better. Right. And so if I come back in and check in and like, right, again, and I know health and therapy are a little bit different, but in the same way of, okay, I was really motivated, right? And I was doing the meal plan, I was doing the exercises, and then something happened, right? Is that maybe like I'm gonna look at the meal plan first. Like, is it the meal plan?
Mhm.
Okay, no, not the meal plan. Cool. Then let's look at the exercise. And waiting until like what's the thing that didn't work, right? Because
Mhm.
and it may be a matter of behavior, or it may be a matter of like, you know what? Because it's not really this, right? The thing that I was really looking at when I was getting on this stuff was that I thought it would spark my relationship. So it doesn't matter what you do then with a meal plan or a workout plan after that. If what it ended up being was that I thought doing this was going to spark something in my relationship,
Mhm.
those are going to fall off, right? And that's where, like, as somebody who's like a health coach or a trainer, has the opportunity to come back and say, hey, look, all right, so here's what I can say is like either in my field, not my field, and the recommendation I give for that. But like, let's look at what has been helpful for you in this, right? Let's reorient it, and because I think maybe there's more than just the relationship, or maybe there's not. I don't know. Um, but it but I would like to believe, like, when we talk about living a healthy life, that we can feel the difference. And so being able to even come back and being like, so, what are some of the benefits that you are getting from this? Because now that we know that that's maybe what was really the stuck point, right? Now we can come back and say, how do we get back to you? And then, but I think it's that part where people don't know. Like, I mean, we'd like to give people a lot more credit to be aware of what's happening, but we live in a disconnected world where that is what we spend our entire life doing, until some moment when we're like, that's enough, I'm going to go get help. But it's
Mhm.
like, that's, I don't know, 20, 30, 40, 50, however old people are when they come to see professionals, right? Whether it's a health coach, a trainer, a psychologist, anyone, like, by the time people are coming, they've spent a lifetime learning how to be disconnected. And
Mm.
then a lot of times we're like, okay, here's 12 weeks, 6 months, a year,
Hmm.
get reconnected.
Yeah.
And surprised why so many fail.
And not just fail, it's like they do. I have a buddy who, drove Uber for 2 years. He founded a startup for 5 years and was just sitting all the time, was in school his entire life, really nerdy, bright guy. And then he just worked as head of product for another company for 2 years, 12, 15 hours a day, 5 hours of sleep. And he's always had this like a little bit of belly fat and never really hit the gym, started eating much better. And now it's been 5 months since he got laid off, and he's done all possible research on how to get rid of belly fat. And I guess he started exercising and sleeps normally. He's like, "Hey, I still have a little bit of belly fat." I said, "Dude, you have been sitting at a desk for 27 years, and including the last five between Uber and being the head of product at this startup. And it's just not going to take 5 months. Like, keep at it, you know?" And I think same with what you said about folks being disconnected for 30 years from their emotions and then just coming in and hoping it'll change quickly, which it will. It will change. They'll see like the initial period of they will probably feel much better in the first 4 to 8 weeks of therapy. At least that's been my experience with therapy. But there will be a time where they might even feel worse because a lot of things will come up that they don't really know how to
Yeah.
deal with, and then they'll revert to alcohol or they'll revert to porn or they'll revert to some habit which is probably deleterious to their health in a way. But they'll have you or someone there to support. And so what I'm just thinking out loud is when we orient towards helping those around us, not to mention ourselves, um, it's tapping into practices like yoga, fitness. Uh, those are just what's in my world, but journaling, reading, art, creativity, dance are some other ones that come up. Um, and you probably have some more. It's getting reconnected with your body on a daily or weekly or some kind of basis. And yet, with these trauma scars, oftentimes we don't even know we have them. Like, I knew someone that was unfortunately molested as a child, and they really didn't remember until they just did one day. And so, oof. I mean, we could look at a public health perspective of like therapy should be much more accessible, cheaper, and widespread for most folks, and should be promoted in primary school and grade school, and just sort of socialized better so that people inevitably connect to themselves more. I mean, we could look at the decline of religion and the Christian church specifically. You could tell I like to go big on the themes here. I'm just thinking like,
Oh yeah.
how do we get,
Well,
yeah, how do we
can
get
I,
people more
so you said
aware?
two, so well, so I guess this will answer that question. But I was like, before you go too far, there are two things that you said that, like, to me were like they're these really really special nuggets, um, and I think one is embracing the fact that like we're gonna fall. Like, and so
Hmm.
another thing I always say is you
Hmm.
can't always stick the landing.
Mm.
Like I said, this book is really funny. I really do think it was a good book.
What's it called again?
But
It's
healthy as fuck.
healthy as fuck. We'll have to link it. I'll link it.
It's yeah,
Cool.
it's like Una Duncan. But she was talking about like even like, when you look at like, the all stars, right? Or the best like athlete, the best celloist. It's like it's not that they like are perfect. It's like they have just done it so often
Hmm.
that they correct their mistakes sooner.
Hmm.
And I think that's a huge reframe, right? Which is like you're not going to stick the landing every time. If you come in thinking there is one day I'm going to stick the landing right, my trauma is a bruise, one day it will disappear and go away if I do the right things,
Hmm.
you're setting yourself up for failure and a massive fall. Versus like,
Hmm.
you know what, there's going to be some time when it is not going well, right? And you may go for that unhealthy thing, but how much easier it is to get back up when you're like, oh man, you know what? Like, yeah, I couldn't stick the landing. I fell. But it's all part of it, right? It's part of what I'm expecting to do, right?
Right. You're
That's
expecting
the
to miss a
first.
shot. Yeah. You're not going to make every
Mhm.
bucket. You know what I mean? You're going to show up to practice late sometimes. You're going to be hungover sometimes. Right. Um,
Yep. If I thought there was going to be a day that I used to play basketball, and it was like if I thought there was a day
mhm.
that one day I was going to get every single bucket, I would have quit. I would have quit a long time
Yeah.
ago. because it was
Mm-hmm.
never going to happen. I was never going to be 100% accurate, but that is how we take living, is like, oh, at some point we're going to perfect this. So that's the first part. And the other part that you sort of tied into, and I just realized this, and I realized this specifically for myself with nutrition, was education.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do well what you know nothing about, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
the things that we become experts on are the things that seem really easy, or things that we spend a lot of time with.
Mm-hmm.
Before I, got into grad school and went to psychology, like, these conversations that I'm like spouting off, like, we can talk about sex and
Yeah,
trauma and this and
sure,
that,
sure.
like, it rolls off my shoulders now. But when I first was like, like,
Exactly.
I couldn't say certain words. I couldn't talk about certain things. Like, I couldn't do certain things because, like, I just lacked the education. And so part of this is like, when it is not, if one other story I'll give, because I think it really ties it in, is like, I was a military brat. I moved around all the time, but we didn't
Mm-hmm.
really travel, right? We didn't
Mm-hmm.
like travel for like vacation. And so I remember I was in grad school, and I had a girlfriend there, and we were planning a trip, like, for when we graduate, to go to Costa Rica. And she's like, "Yeah, we should just rent a car. And we can just go from here to here." And I'm like, "Wait, you can rent a car in a different country? Like, what?" And like I'm getting so overwhelmed, and
Mm-hmm.
like, and she's just like piecing this trip together. She's like, "Well, we traveled all the time when I was a kid. We just, like, we
Mm-hmm.
went to Europe, we went here, we went there." But because I had never done it, the idea of trying to put a trip together felt like an enormous mountain to climb, where, because she had been traveling since she was a kid, it was so integrated, right? That, back to that word,
Mm-hmm.
integration, integrating
Mm-hmm.
who she was, that it was just like, yeah, we just have to look up and see what it does. And like, and of course, like, yes, it was easy once I, like, as she was holding my hand.
Mm-hmm.
But if she wouldn't have held my hand through it, I wouldn't have done it. And I definitely wouldn't have done it like that, because it was so foreign, so unknown, that it made it terrifying. And I think that goes to, the conversation we've been having today, whether it's health, sex, life, is that we can be paralyzed by that terror because it's unknown. And so we have to stop living in these worlds where things are unknown. And it's like, learn about nutrition, like, grab a
Mm-hmm.
book,
Mm-hmm.
talk to somebody who believes in nutrition, or talk to somebody who talks about mental health and talks about living, self-development. But if you don't have those type of conversations, if you can't even, like, maybe listen to a podcast, or, an episode of a show, anything, it can lead to paralysis. And that's all of us.
And when folks are just completely unaware of, let's just take nutrition, like, I have family members who are completely unaware of it, or actively doing the opposite, as in every time something looks healthy, they do the opposite. And how do you green pill, going back to the subject, the name of the podcast, how do you green pill them? Because sometimes the information's out there. We no longer live in 1985 where you only have encyclopedias in the library. So when you know someone close to you could make a change, taking the stock answer that yes, they have to be ready. But beyond that, if they're maybe not ready or on their fence in terms of stages of change, like, education would be great because it is unknown to them. So you can tap them on the shoulder and say, "Hey, did you know that eating a burger every day will, like, blah 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 blah?" And then they don't want to hear it. Oftentimes, who wants to hear it? I certainly don't want to hear it. In certain areas of
Yeah.
my life, and I'm you know, I understand human behavioral science enough somewhat to know that I have my blind spots, and even though I still think my blind spots aren't that blind because I'm perfect. How do you take someone who, I am, right? And everyone listening out there's like, well, yeah, I actually am healthy because I'm already, like, listening to this podcast and I'm already interested in health. Like, the reality is this health world. And I was talking to a guy, Joe Holder, the other day, who's Nike master trainer, health consultant for Dyson, for Hyperice, he did the first master class on health. Joe's a mentor to me. And we were on a 5K in Miami where I caught him, and I said, hey, what was I asking him? Basically, it was like, how do you get the message out there? I lost my train of thought, but how do you get somebody
A
who's
green pill.
yeah, how do you green pill somebody? Exactly. And I don't know if there's an easy way to do it, but I'd love to hear your take.
I, one, I'd say, of course, there's not easy because, like, again, it's not a microwave; it's humaning.
Mm,
Um,
sure, sure. Great
the
answer.
other part, the other
Give
part
me
of
the
this is
next
low
one. Yeah.
hanging fruit, right? Like, I would say low hanging fruit, which is what do they like, right? So if I have somebody who's like loving to go get burgers, fine. Like, can I come and just make vegetarian burgers or
Yeah.
vegan
Yeah.
burgers,
Yeah.
right? Or you know what? Can I own that? I love health. So like I love podcasts. If you come into my car, we're not listening to music. You're gonna listen to whatever podcast I'm listening to.
Interesting.
I listen a lot about, self-development, finances, health. I mean, like whatever it's on, like we like and she does curse, but like that's fine. But my little one is in the car and he's like, Mommy, like, can we just like listen to music? I'm like, I'm listening to this book, this book about
Mhm.
health. And I'm like, what did you learn? And he's like, fill your plate half with vegetables. I didn't
Oh,
have to
yeah.
tell him anything. It's just like you just
You
being in
learned
my
it.
orbit,
Yeah.
you're gonna hear it, right? And so if they're people like I think that's the other thing is people don't understand the power of orbit. Like they don't need to like the message doesn't have to always click with you.
Hmm.
The message may click like 100 experiences after you,
Yes.
but
Yes.
like
Totally. Plant the seed.
you know yeah. And so like sometimes it's just like if I am secure and aligned in my values,
Hmm.
like if those values are important and I think they're important for the people I love and care about, I just need to be me. Like anywhere I go, I'm going to talk about financial health because I think it's really important. It
What if
comes
people
up in
don't want to
different
hear it from
conversations.
you though? What if like, what if the sibling or the family member who's like their finances aren't in check and you're kind of, hey, I would just listen to this podcast, or I don't want to hear that, Jasmine, I don't want to talk about that. But 100 times later, they might, right? Like you planted the seed, or you might share
Yeah.
something via email. Like, how do you do it without proselytizing? Because I mean, you seem like a high
I
energy
well
person who's dynamic, as you share. But I am too. I like to share. I like to talk. But sometimes people are like, "STFU, I don't want to hear it."
I
Um,
I think the difference is I'm not talking to them to tell them necessarily as much as like usually I'm trying to like make sure the information is integrated for me. Right.
hmm.
So if somebody asks me like, hey, how's your day? I'm like, oh man, I was just like listening to this thing and I'm like trying to figure out,
Hmm.
how do I, diversify my income and that like I really need to like have a good plan for thinking about my like 401k. And like
Hmm.
because that is how my day is going. I'm thinking about that's where my day
Hmm.
was at. I'm not going to give you some like generic, my day was fine. I'm going to actually tell
Hmm.
you where my head is at.
Hmm.
If you're like asking me about like something I might do on the weekend if I'm I'm like trying to be more active. I'm like I've realized that maybe I've like had too many glasses of wine and so I'm really like I want to be more active. Like it's not even it doesn't even need to be like here let's talk about this subject, right?
Hmm.
As much
Hmm.
as like I'm integrating those pieces into me. Like I think I look at a lot of things as identity. So, and I don't look at identity as just as like race, sex, gender. Like I think of identity as like my financial identity, like my erotic identity, like my emotional identity. There's all these, my spiritual, there's all these places there. They're parts of my identity. And so for me, if they're like important, they're all gonna have like again, they're gonna have space to learn to thrive and to blossom and to grow. Because if I'm just keeping them pushed down, like they're not going to go very far, right? Like they just won't. And sometimes I like I have these conversations and somebody recommends something, somebody I didn't even know would be into that. It's like, oh hey, especially if you're in a group, sometimes
Hmm.
people want to hear it and they just don't know how to start it. And so
Hmm.
I, I think is rather than being like this is a topic or a subject we need to discuss, is like
Hmm.
if that's integrated into to what is happening in my life right then and there, then that is something that I'm gonna bring up. Like this book, right? Like I literally just finished listening to it yesterday and was like, oh wait, so many pieces are clicking right now.
Hmm.
I didn't have any intention of like, let me bring this book into here.
It wasn't prompted at all. Yeah, I mean, we were talking about health, but you brought it in because it just clicked. It integrated in your head, and I think what you're getting back to on as a meta perspective is just humaning, which I like your word for that. And you can't always build systems around things. You can't always have tools. Sometimes things just need to happen naturally. I mean, I have some family who would never exercise, and all of a sudden, recently, they've started actively exercising, bought a wearable, and it's like I can see the antecedents, and I wouldn't. I try to live my, my world and just exercise a lot, be active, show them how good I feel, how I fix my stomach issues, I fix my mental health issues, this and that, but eventually, like, my proselytizing did not work. Nobody wanted to hear it. So I just started living my truth, my identity, including the finances stuff, things I've struggled with, relationships, sex, those things. So I like how you're
Yeah.
just bringing it back to being not a normal person, but just maybe being yourself. And that will spread the light if there's a way. And then I think, a professional capacity is a different story, right? And a public capacity, whether it be on social media or podcasts, that's a different, role. But in your private
Yeah.
life, I think it's just so interesting. People like you see patients all the time. For the listeners, say like, okay, well, in Jasmonae's private life, this is how she shows up, because that's the whole genesis of this. It's like, as health practitioners, how do we spread the message, other than professionally? And I think that's, one real good way is to just be a human and be yourself, and just spread the light that way. Do you have anything to add there,
Absolutely.
or we can probably,
Um,
you can finish up with our
absolutely.
last three tips, but I'd love to hear what you add there. Hmm.
I think the one thing, right, that I think that I would just say on that is that you
Hmm.
mentioned is that, you know, the best thing we have is the ability to model. And
Mm.
w- I think most humans want to be happy in life. I don't think humans enjoy pain.
Hmm.
Well, they can enjoy intensity. Intensity, that's another thing I learned, right? It's the difference between intensity and pain. I just went through a really good training with for kink actually, and talking about the difference of what is pain versus what is intensity. And so humans don't actually, right, like enjoy pain, right? And so if humans don't actually enjoy pain, then when they see that, like, man, something's changed, or man, being around this person feels better, right? I don't have to tell people like being around me will feel good, and then you just do
Hmm.
what I do and then you'll feel good. It's like,
Hmm.
if I work on feeling the best that I can and then showing up and allowing people to just like take in some of that, I think that does so much more than trying to tell them what will feel good, right?
Hmm.
Let them feel what feels good. And when people are around you and you're feeling good, they're going to feel that. They're going to be like, man, I always feel really great when I hang out with them. And you want to
Mm.
hang out with them more. And so you start paying attention, like, what are they doing? Like, they're doing something
Mm.
right. Just
Hmm.
like, when you feel worse with hanging out, like, man, every time I hang out with that person, I always like, oh, I feel
Yeah.
horrible
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah.
So just be you, right? And you worry about feeling good and taking like up all the space and helping that space feel amazing. And you know what? If people are feeling that, eventually they're gonna be like, all right, they're doing something right. What is it?
I love
Everybody
that.
wants the
Honestly, it
magic
makes it
sauce.
so simple. When I talk about tools, I'm like, well, what's the most simple way to communicate this this to somebody? And in this case, the green pilling is being you and just being vibrant and feeling your best. And people do that is how people model. I mean, that is how kids learn, right? That's how people learn.
Absolutely.
When you're at work, you have a boss, and you're like, wow, they're really crushing it. It seems like they're really thriving. So you start asking, well, what's your morning routine? Oh, well, I get up at 6, I make my coffee, I don't touch my phone. Oh, shoot, I want to try that. So that I think that
Yep.
makes a lot of sense. And I really want to socialize what we just discussed, the screen pilling idea of being yourself, just beyond this health bubble, and just getting other people to pick up on it. So I think it's just, one person at a time, and one good day of you at a time. And one bad day sometimes also will happen, because even on a bad day, you can still model good behavior for yourself and for others. Like, you might have half a bad day and half a good day. So I like how simple you made it with the modeling and being yourself, and thank you for that. Well, I think that's probably a good place to pause, at least until we speak again, because I would love to hear about intensity versus pain and kink and eroticism. And I think there's a lot more there that I'm personally curious about, and probably the audiences too. Do you want to send us home with a couple of your just top tips for what you tell your patients in dealing with trauma and dealing with their health, and summarize some of the things we talked about? If you give us just three quick hits,
Three quick hits.
if it's
As
possible.
far as, yeah, three quick hits. If it comes to just, I think life experiences or trauma is recognizing that it is an experience, right? And the biggest thing is learning how to integrate it into who you are rather than fix it or get rid of it. The next one, would be is lead with curiosity, whether
Hmm.
it's around sex, whether it's around health, whether, it's around, you know, things fitting or not fitting right, feeling right, not feeling right is the more curious you are, the more likely you will start to get closer to what the answer is. And then the final tip, is laugh. Try to laugh. Try to laugh once a day. Laugh during sex, laugh during workouts. um, just laugh, you know?
Amazing. I love that. I really didn't expect that, and you made me laugh. So I'm glad this is on camera.
Awesome.
Uh, Jasmonae, Joyriel, thank you so much. This is so wide ranging, but also deep. So excited for people to hear this. Where can people find you? Can you give your site, and your socials, and then we'll link it as well in the show notes.
Absolutely. You can find me online at www.igniteanew.com. That is my website. I am also on Instagram, Ignite a New Therapy, underscores in between, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Dr. Jasmonae Joyriel. And yeah, send questions. I love chatting with people. So um, yeah, this has been amazing. I really, really, really had fun today.
Yeah, same here. Likewise.